So you're Martin Bromley in 1950s post-war Japan, and remembering the pain of war is unavoidable. It's in the streets, the skies, everywhere you look. Everyone's rebuilding, but you see opportunity. American GIs stationed overseas are bored out of their minds, burning through paychecks looking for anything to kill time. And that's where you come in. You're not making video games yet. Heck, nobody is. You're in the business of coin-operated amusements. Slot machines, jukeboxes, the stuff people kill time with while chasing a quick hit of excitement. It's simple pleasures and easy money. But Japan is not friendly to anything smelling like gambling. So you and your partners set up a company with a slick, all-American name, Service Games. You import coin-op machines straight from the US, clean up their image, and get them onto every military base you can. American soldiers drop their change in by the bucketful. It's not just a business now, it's a legacy in motion. But as 1960 rolls in, the Japanese government decides your kind of operation doesn't fit their vision anymore. They start tightening regulations, pushing out businesses that even resemble gambling. You see the writing on the wall. If Service Games is going to survive, it needs a new identity, a new angle. So you dissolve the company, shuffle the pieces, and reemerge as a sleek modern name that rolls off the tongue. And just in time. Because across the Pacific, something is brewing. The golden age of arcades isn't here yet, but the seeds are being planted. Games aren't just mechanical anymore. Companies are experimenting with electronics. You see the shift coming. You don't know exactly where it leads, but one thing is certain. Sega will be part of it. Then, in the early 70s, a game called Pong drops like a bomb. Atari proves something you always suspected. Video games aren't just a novelty. They're the future. And you've got money, you've got factories, and you've got the perfect name. Sega is about to enter the war. But your part in Sega's story won't last. So today, let's dive into the untold truth about Sega.
Ingalls has a problem. He needs to earn the respect of his peers. So he gets Sega Genesis, the ultimate action system.
While Martin Bromley gets things rolling with Sega, by the mid-60s, he decides to step aside. Maybe the pressure of business wasn't for him, or maybe he just wanted to kick back with a cold one and some jukebox tunes. Either way, he's out. And just like that, Sega needs new blood. Someone sharper, someone with vision, someone to take the reins. Say goodbye to Martin Bromley, don't worry, he's fine, and step into the shoes of David Rosen, Mr. Big Picture. Rosen wasn't just any businessman. Before stepping into the Sega spotlight, he was already a successful entrepreneur. In the 1950s, he had founded Rosen Enterprises, a company that specialized in importing and selling American photo booths to the Japanese market. It was a brilliant move. Japan was experiencing a post-war economic boom, and entertainment was in high demand. These photo booths were a cultural phenomenon, quickly becoming a staple in shopping malls and arcades. But Rosen didn't stop there. He noticed arcade-style entertainment was catching on and shifted gears. Coin-operated amusement machines became his business venture. He spotted the promise in mechanical games years before video games took the stage. When Sega, still a small but growing company, merged with Rosen Enterprises in 1965, it all came together. With Rosen in charge, Sega stopped being just an importer. They started building their own machines. Games like 1970's Sega Gunfight quickly became arcade staples. So, what's your next major step as head of Sega? Well, look no further than Periscope. Launched in 1966, Periscope stood out in the arcade world. With its life-sized periscope and dynamic light displays, it recreated submarine battles, giving players the thrill of launching torpedoes at glowing targets. As Rosen would later say in an interview about the game, the Periscope was a turning point for coin-ops. It was a simple game, but the aiming device looked like a real periscope, and the player had to release torpedoes in time to hit the ships. It sounds simple today, but at the time, it was revolutionary. It might seem outdated today, but Periscope wasn't just a game, it was an event. It was one of the first arcade games to demand multiple quarters per play, a move that reshaped arcade pricing for years to come. Periscope was so successful that US and European distributors flew to Japan to see what it was all about and exported it. This wasn't just a win for Sega, it was a statement they were the big players in gaming. Periscope's success turned Sega from a distributor into a real innovator, and it didn't stop at Japan. American arcades welcomed Sega with open arms. Under Rosen's leadership, Sega expanded aggressively into the arcade business. Meanwhile, the 70s saw Atari drop Pong, Midway Games released Space Invaders, and Sega began lighting up game centers on both sides of the Pacific with titles like Fonz, Monaco GP, and Heavyweight Champ. The two-decade golden age of gaming arcades had just begun. And then, well, just like that, you're out too. With a boardroom shuffle, Sega swaps you for Japanese businessman Hayao Nakayama. Nakayama is an accomplished salesman, a business genius, and a former textiles executive. But there's just one problem. He knows nothing about video games. Nakayama comes from a family of doctors and made his wealth from leasing jukeboxes. But Nakayama isn't here to tinker. He's here to relaunch Sega into the gaming revolution about to sweep the globe. No hard feelings, right, Rosen? Before you get the chance, the 80s have hit, and Nintendo, a former toy company, is gearing up to flip the game industry on its head. What happens next is a revolution, a single shot across the bow, and the entire world will feel it. The early 80s arrives, and with it, one of the industry's most formative failures, the North American video game crash of 1983.
The boom years for video games are over. Despite a new generation of ever more sophisticated games, business at video games and arcades is off in some places as much as 80%. Arcades everywhere are suffering, some are closing.
Video games, I don't think are as popular as they were before.
They aren't with you, huh?
No.
Retailers dump cartridges into bargain bins, arcades lose their luster. Almost every company that hasn't formed a true connection with consumers vanishes. It's absolute chaos. Game over for much of the industry. And yet, despite this monster of a crash, Nintendo emerges with a silver bullet in the form of the Famicom, soon to become the NES in the West. With this new market domination, Nintendo reigns supreme, and for a moment, what seemed impossible becomes true. Video games and Nintendo become synonymous. They've won before the fight even properly begins.
On the Nintendo Entertainment System. Now you're playing with power.
Sega should wave the white flag, yet under Nakayama's leadership, you decide to fight back. First, you release the SG-1000, a solid effort, but clunky and no match for the NES. Then the Sega Master System, a more powerful response, but one stifled by Nintendo's aggressive exclusivity deals that prevent third-party developers from making games for anyone else. Sega isn't just losing market share, it's being boxed out entirely. Nintendo's grip on third-party developers was ironclad, and their licensing rules locked developers into exclusivity. If they made a game for the NES, it wasn't going anywhere. This cutthroat move crippled Sega's chances of building a solid library for the Master System. Sure, your console had the tech, but without heavy hitters like Capcom, Konami, or Square on board, it felt like defending yourself with a slingshot. A true David and Goliath story. But as Sega, you still had something Nintendo could never buy, an arcade empire. While they nailed the console wars, you stayed rooted in neon-lit cabinets. Space Harrier, Outrun, Afterburner, they pushed visuals and sound to the edge, making arcades the testing ground for the future. Nintendo may have locked in homes, but on arcade floors, Sega was still the star. So you don't quit. Nakayama doubles down, pushing the company to rethink everything. And in 1988, Sega made history with the Mega Drive, known internationally as the Sega Genesis. With its bold design and breakneck performance, the Sega Genesis came with a clear message. Your time at the top is done, Nintendo. Sega wasn't interested in playing second fiddle anymore. The Genesis launched with a clear plan: target an older audience. While Nintendo was seen as a family-friendly company, Sega wanted to appeal to teenagers and young adults. Their marketing campaigns leaned into an edgier tone with slogans like "Free."
but Nintendo.
And aggressive commercials that painted Nintendo as outdated and slow. For a while, it works. Sega Genesis trumps Nintendo, especially in North America, where it's positioned as the cooler, faster alternative to the family-friendly NES. With classic games like Golden Axe, Shinobi, and Alex Kidd, you can feel it in the air. Christmas mornings are for the Sega Genesis, not the NES. The Genesis transformed Sega into a real contender. By the early 90s, Sega had carved out a massive market share in the US, outselling the Super Nintendo in key regions and creating a dedicated fanbase. Sega became a household name, and popular Sega sports titles like NBA Jam and Joe Montana Football further solidify your reputation as the console for teens and young adults. As Nakayama in the early 90s, you feel great, but a shadow looms. Nintendo isn't the only problem anymore. Other console manufacturers are starting to make their move, and one mistake could cost you everything. 1991 rolls in, but before Sega goes any further, there's one glaring problem: an identity crisis. Nintendo has Mario, the cheerful plumber who's become a global icon. Namco has Pac-Man, a legend in his own right, chomping his way into pop culture history. And then there's you, Sega. You've got great hardware, sure, but you don't have someone, the face, the personality that screams, "This is Sega." You've got a major problem on your hands.
I've had conversations with Mr. Nakayama, the CEO of the company, about what needed to be done for Sega to compete in the United States marketplace.
Every meeting with marketing feels the same. Eyes dart around the room, the weight of expectation choking the air. Anyone got an idea, you ask? Silence. Everyone knows Sega needs more than just a console. It needs a champion. Someone to embody everything Sega stands for: speed, boldness, and a rebellious attitude. And then it clicks. Enter Sonic the Hedgehog.
So the company started to ask all employees to come up with ideas.
純粋にゲームの企画を最初作ったんですけど、中さんといろいろ相談しながら生まれたのがソニックになります。
Sonic carried that sharp 90s swagger that kids worship and parents side-eye. Mario might hop around like he's auditioning for a kid's birthday party, but Sonic felt cool and rebellious. Mario was 80s glam rock, and Sonic was Nirvana. Within weeks, Sonic's face will be splashed across TV screens, comic book pages, lunchboxes, and everything a Sega logo can possibly stick to. But it wasn't just Sonic the character that changed the game, it was Sonic the game. Sega wasn't just hawking a new mascot. They brought out a game that could outrun, outpace, and outshine anything Nintendo had going. Sonic the Hedgehog showcased the Genesis's horsepower, delivering speed and fluidity that felt electrifying. You also throw out a new marketing gimmick called quote-unquote blast processing to show how much better you are than Nintendo. Nintendo becomes the chill, dependable Prius, while you're a Porsche roaring past at 100 miles per hour. Sonic's gameplay is all about momentum. It turned precision into a thrill ride, where skill was rewarded and every loop and dash felt like a victory lap. The bold, edgy style drove the point home. Sega does what Nintendo don't. Sonic outsold Super Mario World in North America during the early 90s, giving the Genesis its reputation as the cooler, faster choice. This was no longer about playing nice. Then came Sega's follow-up punch. Sonic 2. Bigger, faster, better. Released in 1992, Sonic 2 took everything that made the original great and cranked it up to 11. Crazier levels, better animations, co-op gameplay with the introduction of Tails, and perhaps most importantly, the Spin Dash, an ability that allowed Sonic to charge up speed from a standstill. Levels like Casino Night Zone dazzled players with neon lights and flipper mechanics straight out of a pinball machine, while Chemical Plant Zone ramped up the challenge with fast-moving platforms and dangerous water segments that kept players on their toes. But it wasn't just the levels. Sonic 2 introduced one of gaming's most iconic rivalries: Sonic versus Dr. Robotnik in the Death Egg Zone. The game's final boss battle was unlike anything seen in platformers before. The massive, towering robotic version of Robotnik, requiring precision, patience, and skill to defeat. You created an unforgettable experience for players. Sonic 2 wasn't just another good game. It was a classic, and everyone knew it. It sold over 6 million copies, topping the Genesis charts and going toe-to-toe with Mario for supremacy. Sonic 2's multiplayer, better physics, and faster feel cemented its legacy as a gaming milestone. Nintendo didn't take that lightly. The SNES was already on the market, powerful and polished, but Sega had locked in the teenage and young adult crowd. The Genesis had the edge. Nintendo wasn't invincible anymore. They had a real fight brewing. This was it. You're unstoppable now. Your game library now includes big successes like Toe Jam and Earl, Golden Axe, NBA Jam, Sonic 2, NHL 94, Disney's Aladdin, and of course, Mortal Kombat. The momentum feels unstoppable. Until you blink, and it's gone. As the old saying goes, uneasy lies the head that wears the crown. While Sonic blazes through sales charts, the hardware division is crumbling fast. By 1993, Sega's strategy becomes reckless. The company bets on costly add-ons like the Sega CD and 32X, and each falls flat. Retailers lose confidence, distributors back away, and for the first time, Nakayama faces the terrifying reality of numbers that just don't add up. Losses pile higher and higher. With the invention of 3D graphics, you bet on the Sega Saturn to bail you out. With the release of the Sega Saturn in 1995, you gamble on a machine that's too advanced for its own good. Developers complain about its complexity, and worse, consumers turn their attention to a buzzing new player, Sony's PlayStation.
It may look like a harmless bagel toaster, but inside is a deadly donut.
Sega feels fully outmatched. The debt worsens, doors of opportunity slam right in your face. Employees scramble to secure deals and keep the lights on. At leadership meetings, Nakayama is visibly tense, watching margins evaporate with no savior in sight. You're on the edge of bankruptcy, and everyone knows it. The glory of Sonic and the peak years of Genesis now feel like distant memories. Sega is dying, but you have one last gamble that just might save you. The Sega Dreamcast.
Other business news, Sega is rolling out a new video game console this week, hoping to win back a larger share of the market.
And we can get enough money to buy a Sega Dreamcast. Sega Dreamcast?
By the late 90s, Sega was in trouble, and the Sega Dreamcast became your final Hail Mary. You place it on store shelves with a launch as bold and brash as Sega itself. Say hello to DJ Sonic. Released in 1999, the Dreamcast was everything Sega needed to make a comeback. It was ahead of its time, featuring a built-in modem for online play, a revolutionary VMU or visual memory unit that acted as a secondary screen, and a library of stunning games like Sonic Adventure, Shenmue, and Soul Calibur. It was sleek, powerful, and beloved by hardcore gamers. For a brief moment, it seemed like Sega had done the impossible. The Dreamcast launched to strong sales and critical acclaim. Dreamcast was innovative, affordable, and fun. But lurking in the shadows was an unstoppable force: Sony's PlayStation 2.
One of the sector's big players is Sega Dreamcast. Mike shows us how it is hoping to blunt the heavily promoted launch this fall of Sony's PlayStation 2.
Uh-oh, not this again. Sony even got the late great director David Lynch to promote the PS2. The PS2's arrival in 2000 crushed Sega's momentum almost overnight. Sony's marketing power, the promise of DVD playback, and the vast third-party support network made the PS2 an unstoppable juggernaut. It had Silent Hill 2 and Metal Gear Solid on it. Need I say more? Retailers saw the writing on the wall and prioritized PlayStation 2 orders, leaving the Dreamcast to wither on store shelves. Despite its technological innovation, the Dreamcast struggled to maintain relevance. Adding to the pressure, Microsoft was preparing to enter the console market with the Xbox, and Nintendo was gearing up for its next move with the GameCube. The console wars were heating up, and Sega ran out of money. At the helm, Hayao Nakayama is forced to step aside after 2 decades as Sega's CEO, and his replacement, Isao Okawa, will not be able to stop the growing avalanche of financial issues. But Isao Okawa won't give up. As the chairman of CSK Holdings, Sega's majority shareholder, Okawa does the unthinkable. He loans Sega $500 million from his personal fortune. In what might be the most charitable act a CEO has ever done, on his deathbed battling terminal cancer, Okawa forgives Sega's debt entirely in 2001. His final act is gifting Sega his personal shares in the company, over $695 million. If you look at the numbers, his generosity is what stops Sega from going extinct like Midway Games and later video game companies like Visceral Games and Neversoft. By 2001, Sega exits the console business entirely, transitioning into software. Nakayama will always be the guy who built Sega into a powerhouse, but Okawa is the hero remembered for saving Sega's legacy. When Sega dropped out of hardware in 2001, the story didn't stop. Not for Sega, and definitely not for Sonic. The Hedgehog became the face of their reinvention. Sonic broke free of hardware loyalty, landing on PlayStation and Xbox, platforms that would have been forbidden ground in the 90s. It's strange to imagine at first, but soon, Sonic's presence on these major platforms cemented his status as an enduring piece of gaming heritage. Then comes a moment that feels impossible. In 2007, Sonic makes his debut in Super Smash Bros. Brawl. Imagine that for a second. Sonic standing shoulder to shoulder with Mario, his old rival. 20 years earlier, this would have seemed unthinkable, but there they stand, sharing the same screen. It's an olive branch acknowledging their shared contributions to gaming history. Soon after, Sonic's success would be about adapting and evolving. Except, of course, for Sonic 06, which is the video game version of Plan 9 from Outer Space, wrapped in glitches and undeveloped game mechanics. But hey, we don't talk about that one.
I can't get off! What is this? I can't get off! What is this? I'm stuck! What is my life?
That mulligan aside, Sega spent the 2010s making peace with its past. 2011's Sonic Generations mixed classic platforming with modern polish, a clear play for both new players and die-hard fans. But the real payoff came in 2017 with Sonic Mania, one of the best platformers of this century. As of today, Sonic has stepped into new territory with Sonic Frontiers, Sega's first entry into the open-world genre, and Sonic X Shadow Generations, another great title. But Sonic is only part of Sega's story. Free from the crushing battles of the console wars, Sega has found its rhythm as a gaming software powerhouse. Franchises like Total War and Yakuza have built up devoted fans worldwide, proving that Sega's creative soul remains as inventive as it was in the arcade days under David Rosen. Yakuza, in particular, has blossomed into a cult hit, blending drama, humor, and heartfelt storytelling in a way that feels uniquely Sega. And through it all, Sonic and Sega still shine as a reminder of what could have been, and what still remains. Sega didn't just rise, fall, and give up. They endured, surviving where others crashed and burned. Even without their own console, Sega and Sonic are everywhere. They've become woven into culture, and you don't have to play a game to know who they are. From multimedia adaptations of Sonic to successful films to its daring reinventions of its beloved series, Sega is a reminder of what it means to adapt and overcome. So that's Sega for you. The big wins, the brutal losses, grudges, handshakes, and reinventions. They all weave into one extraordinary history. They didn't stop at survival. Sega and Sonic became symbols of something more. The legacy of Sega is one of perseverance, and it continues to shape the world today.